Hello and welcome to another episode of Topline Talks, a Mackie Myers podcast hosted by me, Owen Myers.
And me, Jenna Mackey. Not Jenna Mackey. Sorry.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
Ryan Cook.
Here we go.
I've always wanted to do it, haven't I? I've got to do it. Sorry, Jenna.
So I'm joined again by Ryan, who leads our Oxford business, and we've got a fantastic guest today from the Oxford ecosystem. But just broadly, for those new to the podcast, as a finance and exec recruiter, our aim of the podcast is to bring inspiring stories and insights from guests across a range of different sectors to really give us a deep dive into career, talent, change, dealing with boards, etc. So we've got a fantastic guest today in Simon Hewett-Avison, who is Chief Executive at Homeless Oxfordshire. He's been in the role for a couple of years. It got fantastic insights to bring about the issue of homelessness, how we're tackling it in Oxfordshire, but also a really good background about his career and how he's got to where he has today. So Simon, thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Good stuff. Hopefully a good conversation today. So just to kick off for the viewers, I think what would be really interesting is just a brief overview really as to your background, how you've got to where you are and what your job is.
As you said, 2.5 years now at Homeless Oxfordshire as chief exec, but jumped into the charity sector about 15 years ago. So before that was trained as a teacher, studied psychology postgrads, a number of sort of roles within the sort of formal and informal education sector, but really jumped into the voluntary sector sort of through personal experience. So a friend I knew got leukemia, sadly passed away. And that was my first kind of experience, I suppose, with that sort of health and social care. Didn't really know much about cancer. And then a role popped up at Teenage Cancer Trust. So went for it and was lucky enough to get the role. So I've kind of, over the last 15 years, always focused on the service delivery, the operations side of charity work, and worked through a number of different organisations now covering health, poverty, mental health, drug and addiction, and poverty. So, larger national charities mainly. So that sort of national remit, leading large teams, and the last couple of roles being at that sort of director of service, director of operations level. And then COVID came along and helped, as like most people, kind of reevaluated what was going on. I felt like I was getting a little bit too far away from the action, I suppose, sat in an office in London, pretending to know what people in Manchester and Newcastle and Oxford, really needed. So wanted to sort of step back to a more kind of local, regional role. And actually that gave me a really good opportunity to apply for that first chief exec role, take that step up to chief exec. Leading a team of 65, 70 people now, sort of a £6 million organisation, was very similar to those larger charities or the departments that I was leading. So in that respect, it was a kind of nice step across.
Yeah.
And I think, what I'd done for a number of years is hold those trustee positions as well. So that gave me a really good experience in the boardroom, seeing it from both sides of the kind of governance table as well.
Do you feel ready for it when you obviously do all those years at a larger national charity, and you sort of said you've had that reflection to start going for your first role? Was there just a point where you go, I think that's the next step? Because not everyone takes that step.
No, I don't think, like any new job, do you really ever feel ready for it? Probably not.
Yeah, fair.
I think the longer I'm doing this as well, the more I realise that most of us are just making stuff up as we go along, quite frankly. A lot of things that come up and you rely on experience, you've got to rely on the people around you. But I think what I've learned is you're not in these roles unless you've got good gut anyway. You've got good instincts, you kind of know what's right and what's wrong. And like most people in the voluntary sector, you're kind of led by that sort of moral and ethic sort of grounding. So was I ready? Absolutely not. Have I learned a huge amount in the last 2.5 years? Absolutely. But I wouldn't change it.
What was it that surprised you when you took that? Was there anything that, because I guess everyone has a perception, right? What did you find when you actually did make that transition?
Yeah, so I suppose now it's the variety So as a homelessness organisation, housing charity, I can be going from dealing with really serious assaults, sexual abuse, safeguarding cases, through to charity golf days, through to social media posts, meeting with councillors, MPs, commissioners, dealing with neighbourhood disputes, all in the case of a morning. Like the variety is massive, and you've kind of got to know a little bit about everything. But I think the biggest lesson for me was hiring well, getting a good team around you and being able to trust them to get on with the bits that you pay them to do.
Yeah, it's often the answer, isn't it? Get a good team around you.
Absolutely.
And can you talk to us a little bit about, I guess, if we sort of wide angle lens, homelessness generally as an issue in the UK currently? Just be interesting your perspective, and obviously we're about nearly a year into a new government. What does the future look like for how, as a country, we're approaching the challenge of homelessness?
Yeah, so I've learned a lot in the last 2.5 years. This is my first job in homelessness or housing per se. I've worked in a lot of in the sector that surround homelessness, mental health, poverty. And what I've learned is that it's so complex. There isn't a silver bullet. There isn't a one fix, because if there was, we'd have probably done it by now. So things have got worse in the last 2.5, 3 years, that's for sure. We're seeing more people rough sleeping. We're seeing more people turn up at council's door, local authority, asking for help, whether they're about to be evicted from their private rent or whether they're just being asked to leave, friends or family's homes. We're seeing more people turn up who are already homeless. And which has led to a huge increase in the use of temporary accommodation. So the things that are making councils go bust at the moment, the millions and millions that are being spent on hotel and B&B accommodation. So there's lots and lots of reasons. We are seeing a big increase in the number of people being evicted from the private sector. And there's several reasons for that. A lot of smaller landlords getting out of the market, interest rates high, renters' rights reforms coming in that are going to protect renters, which is great. But landlords are seeing that as more hurdles and more red tape. So what we're seeing now is a bit of a spike in those that are leaving the market, selling up, and obviously then putting people at risk. The wars in Ukraine and other parts of the world, increasing cost of living for all of us, seeing a big impact there. And I think just generally the strain on health and social care sectors putting a lot of pressure on those other bits of the system that we all kind of rely on. So yeah, it's kind of that perfect storm at the moment, and it's why we're seeing such an increase. I would say most of these are political choices, though, policy choices. We've spent the last 25, 30 years demolishing, selling our council houses, and not rebuilding to anywhere near the extent we need to. I think for the last 20 years, we've been running at a net deficit of like 25,000 council homes a year, something like that.
Wow.
In Oxfordshire, we're meeting less than 10% of our social housing need. So that's going to take a long, long time to catch up. I think latest reports, we need about 90,000 new social homes a year just to kind of meet the current level of demand. So that's not going to happen overnight. No. That's going to take this government, the next government, a willingness to plan longer than 4 and 5 year cycles and commit funding for more than 4 or 5 year cycles. This will take as long as it has to get into this mess.
There's so much complexity to this, because you talk about the clients of which you're supporting are very complex, as you say, and then you've got this whole socioeconomic environment which is also becoming more and more complex. And as you say, that's so heavily reliant on policy. So as a charity, has that significantly changed your service provision over the years, and even since you've been there? And how do you sort of future plan for that? Because that must be really difficult too.
Yeah, so people are complex. I think that is one of the challenges, but also one of the joys of the job. Every one of our residents has a different story, a different childhood, a different upbringing, most of which are kind of grounded in just horrific experiences, trauma, beyond most of us can comprehend, quite frankly. And so that's always going to take time, and it's going to be complex to kind of undo and unpick and support. Alongside that, I would say our support staff spend most of their time kind of working with, advocating for our residents, trying to help them navigate a system which is so complex. Even for people that kind of know who and how to go about it, it's really hard. Just simply filling in, universal credit forms and getting them to the right place. If you're not digitally, if you're not online, trying to book medical appointments when your life's a little bit chaotic and you don't conform to a 10-minute slot at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. So all these things are kind of set up against those that don't fit that norm in inverted commas. So a lot of our work is spent then. So from a frontline perspective, helping our residents kind of navigate the system, and then what I spend a lot of time doing is trying to use that experience to influence policy change locally. So trying to work with other system leaders in health and social care, criminal justice, the local authorities to try and improve the experience of those residents and others, and using their first-hand experience to show why it's not working.
And is that easier or more difficult to do now? Both in terms of change of government, but equally the alliance-based model, which obviously, Oxford moved on to.
It's hard. Change takes a long time. People often need a lot of convincing, particularly when budgets are very, very tight. One of the things that's very difficult is the way that services are commissioned, often in local authority areas, in silos, means that you make a saving in someone's budget, someone else doesn't really care because it doesn't show up in theirs. So it's a frustrating the way that housing, mental health, social care are all kind of commissioned separately. There are steps being taken to kind of try and bring this together, under the new NHS model, integrated care boards, seeing things much more at a place level, but they're still quite new, really. They're still finding their feet. They're still working through this. What I would say from a national government perspective, I do feel a bit more hope at the moment. We had the privilege, myself and Tina, one of our hostel managers, of meeting Angela Rayner a few weeks ago, and having her here, she listened intently to what our experience was, what we were seeing on the front line, if you like, working with those that are homeless, and Tina herself sharing her experience of being homeless, and what it took to sort of turn that around to get to the position she is now, where she's actually working and leading a team within the hostel she lived at for a period of months. So I get the sense they're listening. What we need to see now is some action, So I think that this is, the next year or so is going to be big in terms of that house building, that long-term approach to funding. But and ultimately we do have to build our way out of this.
Yeah. And so on a more local level, can you paint us a picture for the charity? So what is it? How's it made up? What are the core service areas? Just to kind of bring it to life for any listeners.
Yeah, so Homeless Oxfordshire, we work right across the county. We provide 175 beds for people who need accommodation and support. So we do that in a range of ways. So we have a very large hostel in Oxford City, 54-bed hostel. It's staffed around the clock. And that's really for those who are high risk, very vulnerable, need that level of support to keep themselves and others safe, essentially. So that's intense work. A lot of that is around their physical and mental health, liaising with drug and alcohol services, making sure they're getting the right support. And ultimately, that should be a fairly short stay to then move them into more sort of settled accommodation with that long-term support. So we've got very large hostels, working through some sort of smaller shared housing where people are perhaps a little bit more independent, can cook and manage their own finances and those sorts of things, with a bit more sort of floating support, right through to sort of single flats and bed sits and things like that, where, again, we can provide the support into there. All our accommodation comes with a variety of support. And that's kind of the crux of what we do. We've started more recently working with health colleagues, so colleagues in the NHS, and that's really working with those discharge teams, helping people get out of hospital that don't need to be there medically, but don't have anywhere to go. So again, seeing some great outcomes there with some of those residents.
Yeah, interesting. And then I think, Oxford generally is obviously sort of quite notorious for this issue, right? Because there's lots of different things which are conspiring, for it to be, for that to be the case. But you want to tell us a little bit about, I guess, Ryan referenced it earlier, like the alliance model and how you try to influence kind of a network within the city.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, probably just when I started, actually 2.5, 3 years ago, Oxfordshire embarked on this alliance approach to trying to tackle homelessness. So what that means is that all the local authorities, we work in a 2-tier authority at the moment. That's another story around devolution. But at the moment, we've got 5 districts and the county council all working together, so pooling their budgets, looking at what they spent on homelessness services, coming together and then offering kind of an alliance model, if you like. So we work closely with 5 other providers, St Mungo's, A2 Dominion, Connection Support, Aspire and Elmore. So from the very small community-based charities right through to some larger national charities. And this is in an effort to, I suppose, coordinate our approach much more. So rather than, you often hear in the charity sector people competing against each other for tenders and bids. This is about bringing people together, I suppose, trying to share the power a little bit, share the decision making, share the risk, and very much work in partnership with local authorities. So unlike that sort of traditional, I'm a commissioner, you're a provider, here's the money, this is what you do for it. It's much more of an equal playing field, so we all kind of sit around the same table trying to make those decisions that would best meet the needs of our residents, our clients. So it's an interesting approach. There's been some ups and downs. It's a different way of thinking, both for local authority and for the charities. There's been some great relationships formed. We've seen some really good efficiencies being made, often actually at point of crisis. So you've got to think differently. Kind of forces you into, and with money being tight, that's one of those areas where you really have got to think a little bit differently. As well as trying to meet an increasing level of demand.
And also, all those organisations are all going through their own challenges, as you said earlier, in terms of trying to adapt to all of the challenges that the voluntary sector is facing. So, do you share organisational challenges as well as a community?
Yeah, I would say this approach has led us to be a lot more open and transparent. Good. To the point of we share costs. So we will share what our staffing costs for the alliance will be, our own costs. What makes up those numbers that go into tenders and bids. So there's a lot more transparency, and nothing's really secret or hidden in that respect. Nice. We, as an alliance leadership team, so the chief execs, those directors, we meet regularly. We share good practice. We share what we learn. We share what's not going well. Sure. And then at kind of every level of the organisation. So, I know our HR lead is linked up with the other HR leads in the charities. We've tried to work on some of the back office stuff, see if there's anything we can do in terms of procurement. Buying in bulk. Is there anything we can do to save money there? So these things are slowly coming online. Trying to bring some of those efficiencies, coordinate effort a little bit more. So yeah, it's a work in progress. Yeah, and there's been a few of these alliances kind of set up. I think we're one of the few that are still going, so we're taking that as a positive.
Yeah, very good.
Absolutely. It probably brings us on quite nicely to the role of a chief executive, and probably specific to the organisation you're in, but more kind of broadly, and how you try and manage your time. Because talking from personal experience, obviously different sector, but I run a company, and as you referenced earlier, you're just in everything constantly. So how can you step back and make sure you're apportioning your time? How do you go about that? And sort of, are there any sort of typical cycles as to where you're spending more time doing external advocacy or internal operational management or whatever? If you can bring us into that, that'd be really insightful.
Yeah, so it's changed over the last 2.5 years. I think from when I started, focus has changed a little bit. I would also say that, being a service delivery organisation, we are very reactive. I can have all the best plans in the world, turn up at work on a Monday and, you may as well rip it up. Working with 175 extremely complex individuals every day brings about a challenge. And so, as I say, some days you just got to stop what you thought you were doing and react to what's in front of you. So that's a large part of it. That's becoming less a part for me now that we have got a really good team in place. The confidence and trust is there in that senior team to manage and deal with whatever comes up. So that has become less of a role for me. I think when I first started, there was a lot of internal gazing to be done, a lot of stones to be turned over, particularly from a kind of a finance and a HR perspective. So we had to do a lot of looking, under the bonnet, see where the money was going, where the money was coming from. So that took the best part of 12 to 18 months to really understand that sort of finance model, if you like, the business model the charity was operating on. where money was essentially being hemorrhaged, where we could save. But also actually where we had opportunity in terms of income. So that was probably the first 12 to 18 months, a real focus there. And I think really in the last sort of 12 months, we've really been able to kind of look ahead now, plan a little bit further ahead. Now we're on solid foundations. And I would say now I spend a lot of my time on those kind of external relationships, whether that's commissioners, local authorities, councillors, other charities, partners, looking for opportunity, kind of trying to join dots together, I suppose. And then probably occasionally now sort of diving into things that, might need a bit more attention, but that's kind of become slightly less, as I say, over the last 12 months, but still needed.
So 2.5 years in, is there anything now you would tell yourself 2.5 years ago to either do differently or be aware of?
Yeah, a lot of things. So coming from a service operations background, my comfort blanket is operations. I love speaking to our residents, our staff. That's the bit that I suppose gets me out of bed in the morning. Looking back, I would have spent a lot more time nosing the spreadsheets, in the finance, and I think we probably could have resolved some of that stuff a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
So I suppose, and I still now have to push myself into that space. We've got a great finance team in place, but that's the bit, consciously I have to put myself into. Whereas, I could spend all my time just chatting to residents and seeing how they're getting on and, listening to their stories. So I think, and most chief execs are going to come through one route or another, whether it's fundraising or marketing or finance. So I suppose that's the bit, is to kind of know where your blind spot is or where your weakness is a little bit, I suppose, and lean into that a little bit more than I did.
You talked about earlier about having the right team, but how much of that is about cultural change versus operational change and process and governance?
Yeah, we spent a lot of time in the early days, both on strategizing, planning, I suppose. But the biggest part of that for me was actually just getting out, talking and listening to our staff and supporters, and kind of the start of the cultural change piece. The charity had been through a difficult period, what with COVID, financial issues, bit of a vacuum in leadership, and people just wanted to be heard. And actually share their views on what they thought the charity was good at, what it wasn't good at, where we fit in the kind of wider system. Yeah. And so as much as the strategy development was about developing a plan, actually it was about, building bridges and repairing some of the relationships that had kind of gone a little bit astray with some of the charity. And, really pleased to say now that, 2.5 years on, our staff engagement is brilliant. There's always things you can work on, but, the first survey we ran, I think we had less than 50% of the charity even complete the survey in the first place. Wow. Whereas this year, 93% completion rate. We've got over 75% of people saying that, they see themselves here in sort of 5 years' time, which in our world is a long, long time. Lots can change. So, I've seen some massive improvements in staff engagement, staff retention. When I first started, recruiting and retaining good people was really
retention
really
in the care
tough.
sector is
really tough.
Harsh.
Yeah, but now we've got a really stable team. We're recruiting from different organisations, and I think part of the marker for me is we're seeing people joining us from some of those other charities that we work with, which for me, is a great indicator that we're doing things right.
Any sort of general tactics or tips, if you like, for leading through change? So obviously, you diagnose the problem and need to then go on a bit of a journey. So every organisation is unique and every situation is unique. But just broadly, any sort of tactics that you would sort of recommend to people?
So I think every charity I've worked in has been undergoing change. I think it's just something that the voluntary sector is kind of always having to embrace, because nothing stands still. Funding changes, the landscape changes. So what have I learned? It's tough, I think, is the main thing. You've got to be ready, particularly if it's a particular change program you're looking to implement. I would recommend not starting that if you're not ready. It takes a lot longer than you think it's going to take, and it continues. There's got a long tail often. And so I think you need that team around you. Something that I think about, or we've been thinking about a lot, is that, thinking really hard about it, but then acting or treading very softly, because any change program, whether it's a restructure or strategy or different process, whatever it might be, those are the hard things, right? But it always impacts people. And it often impacts those not necessarily around that senior table. So it's, we talk a lot about change being hard for everyone, but it's a damn sight harder for those people who are actually impacted, whether it's, redundancies or structure, and at the moment we're seeing some of the big charities, cutting 200 jobs here, 400 jobs there. Like, these are big changes that impact on people's life, their livelihood and their salary. So, think very hard, tread very softly, because it is always people at the end of the day.
Valid. Yeah, I think the trend in what do those cuts actually mean in terms of the service provision overall, I think that's the bit that everyone forgets, because I think there's a presumption that the provision stays the same, or everyone's always asking for more provision.
Yeah, and we see that through our contracts. We're always asked to kind of be doing a little bit more with a little bit less.
Yeah.
And what we've seen with our staff bill increase over the last couple of years, the national insurance hike, all these things put additional pressure that you weren't necessarily planning for. But the level of demand is still the same, if not greater. So, we're always trying to find different ways of cutting up the same cake, essentially, but maintaining a level of service from a safety and quality perspective that our residents deserve. So that is tough, and a lot of that weight comes down to very special people that choose this as a career. Because there's definitely easier careers out there.
100%. I'd agree with that.
Think hard.
Indeed.
Act softly. I really like that as a phrase, actually. Okay, and so what's on the horizon? Over the next 6 to 12 months for the organisation.
Yeah, so it's exciting, actually. I mean, things are continuing to get a tough around us, but as I say, now we're on some firm foundations. We've really been able to sort of look ahead, plan ahead, think what comes next in terms of our property strategy, our service delivery. We've been extremely fortunate to be awarded a 3-year grant from the National Lottery. So we've got 2 or 3 new roles coming in that will supercharge our resident engagement work. So that's thinking about what in addition we can offer our residents. So whether that's around volunteering, around work experience, we're going to look to create a couple of traineeships within the organisation so our residents get an opportunity for employment. That is going to be really, really exciting. We're just recruiting for those roles at the moment. So real supercharge that resident engagement work. We've known that there's been a gap in provision for women across the county, and we're just launched a big campaign called Her Way Home, which is going to look to raise, $1.5 million over the next couple of years for the purchase of a new house, a new home for some of those most vulnerable women. Those that really do need that extra support to kind of hold their front door. A lot of times, women do experience homelessness slightly differently. Often around domestic abuse, sexual abuse, that sort of controlling, coercive behaviour. And it is a much more dangerous place if they are sleeping rough. So we're really excited about launching that campaign. And as well as the sort of home, we're going to provide that wraparound 24/7 support. So working with other local charities, providing that drug and alcohol counselling, working with another great organisation called Survivor Space around the domestic and sexual abuse side of that. That's a really good opportunity for us to fill a gap, I suppose, for provision for women.
I mean, I have to say that the women's provision is so important, isn't it? Because if you think about the classic hostel model, it's not overly accessible to everyone, that model. And you can imagine it's, even having worked very close to the hostel, it's very intimidating.
Yeah, it is.
It can be.
It is, and I think we've been told several times that the women that stay in the hostel or other shared houses with men perhaps have to put on that very stoic, brave face. Yeah. They can't show weakness or vulnerability. You can't. Our psychologist talks about a couple of experiences she's had where female residents have said they won't engage with counselling or psychotherapy whilst in that environment because, if they come out crying after a session, they're going to be seen as vulnerable or weak, and that's just not good enough.
No.
And actually what we've seen, we've got a small women's project at the moment, just the bonds that those women forge, having similar experiences, and that sort of peer support is so crucial. So again, being able to double our capacity with this new provision will be amazing.
And you were saying before, the success of this provision, prior to coming online, is phenomenal. isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we really see people change their lives around, and actually, the two of our staff who work on the women's project at the moment, have both been there themselves. Experienced homelessness and addiction, and they've had their own journey and turned their life around, and are now giving back and working with women who are in a similar position to they were. So the outcomes can be phenomenal and life changing.
Well, we'll definitely be keeping an eye to see how that progresses. That's really important work. Well, we like to, from a time perspective, we like to kick off with a bit of quickfire.
Go for it. Yeah.
So, and again, really interested to get more of your insight, Simon. But I guess, firstly, just, peak and pit of being a CEO since you've been in the role, best bit, most challenging part?
Most challenging part, I suppose the buck always stops with you. And that is a heavy weight sometimes, and particularly in the early days of being a chief exec, having to make some pretty difficult decisions and everyone looking at you to make them,
Okay.
So that's challenging, but rewarding. There is no better job for me, I don't think. I get to work with some brilliant people, see some amazing outcomes, and actually that one thing. So from moving from that director role to being a CEO, you can make change.
Yeah.
You can make it happen. Lead well through it, and you can make those changes that perhaps before I was always a little bit frustrated about not being able to implement. So yeah, that's definitely one of the upsides for me.
Is there a particular moment you look back on you think that was dark?
The first year I was there, we were staring down the barrel of £500,000, £600,000 deficit budget, which we managed to turn around quite quickly and essentially just about broke even that year, and generating a significant surplus this last year, which is enabling us to move forward and purchase and look at that property strategy. So yeah, those early days from a financial perspective were tough, were dark, and no one could tell me where or what the money was doing. So not being able to make informed decisions was tough.
Okay.
And that needed some fairly brutal
especially
change.
where you are now as well. Crikey, it's a phenomenal story. And one thing I should plug, we really lack trustees in the charitable sector. And obviously you are someone who's been a trustee, you're currently dealing with a current board. What's that? Just give us a bit of insight into what that world is like. And for people that haven't done it before, who think, I'm not sure whether I can add value in that space, what's that like?
Yeah, we could speak for hours about charity governance and the good, the bad, and everything in between.
Yeah.
I've served on a number of boards as a trustee. Currently, trustee at the B&Q Foundation, which is brilliant. A charity that gives grants to charities in the homeless space to provide sort of improved spaces. So I've taken a lot from that trustee role. It's a commercial environment. Time is money. Decisions get made quickly. Yeah. And I think actually the more traditional charity work can learn a lot from the corporate sector in that respect. Good information, quick decision making, and move on. And I'm also a trustee of Homeless Link, which again, membership organisation, very different. But I think all my trustee roles have given me a good insight into that board dynamic. I think I've worked at national level. At times that's been challenging. You get a very sort of broad, often disparate board from all parts of the country. I think I'm very lucky where I am now because as well as sort of bringing a wealth of different skills and experience, all our trustees are invested in the place. So they want to see Oxfordshire be a better place, and a better place for our residents. So I think that genuinely with those local organisations really helps. It takes some careful managing. That chief exec chair relationship is crucial. It takes some careful managing so that, you kind of keep trustees at the right level, that strategic governance level, oversight, not getting too operational, but also not getting too far away that, every board meeting you have to recap on what you decided the meeting before. So it's, that's a constant kind of, and back to the previous conversation about, where I focus my time. There are particular parts of the year, those cycles where board meetings and strategy sessions come up that, that gets more of my attention as well. So, if you're interested, I would just say have a look, have a go. It's completely different experience.
And all skills are relevant. I always say this to everyone. Like, I don't know how I'd add value. Trust me, in the blend of a board, skills will be relevant. And again, we just we can't ever have enough support.
And, the charity sector, broad terms, lacks diversity.
Yeah.
The boardroom is even worse.
Yeah.
So, if you're not a white middle-class male, please do consider, because your experience will be extremely valued and valuable within that boardroom setting. We've just gone through a round of recruitment ourselves, really trying to sort of bring about some of that lived experience, some sort of breadth in terms of background, skills, gender, race, so really trying to diversify our board and bring about, it just helps with that sort of critical thinking, that challenging us as an exec team to think a little bit harder on things.
And I should also just point out, there's obviously an elephant in the room, isn't there, that we've all come in our school uniform, but actually there's a real poignant reason. So Simon, I mean, look, these are fantastic, firstly, and obviously, as being someone from Oxford, I absolutely love these anyway, but there's obviously a very poignant story behind it. So do you want to give us a rundown of what Amber Lights is all about?
Yes, so we were very fortunate to work with a young lady called Hannah. A few years ago now. Unfortunately, Hannah died, and her sister Amber ever since has been kind of raising awareness, raising funds, and just doing an amazing job in her sister's memory to keep that, keep her life alive, keep her spirit there, and working with Homeless Oxfordshire on a number of things, so Amber Lights being one of them. So some clothing, handbag ranges, things like that. Just bringing Oxford to life a little bit, and at the same time raising valuable funds for Homeless Oxfordshire. Amber's a very close and dear friend to the charity. Her sister's memory lives on. We've got a little plaque now upstairs in the hostel where she spent some time with us. Amber's drive and passion is amazing. From the crazy, wacky events that her and her husband do, 24-hour marathon type, events, ergathons, you name it. She and her husband do it.
24-hour marathons.
There's some crazy events out there. And again, check over the Amber Lights website. There's lots of information on there about some of the stunts and stuff they do. And they're always thinking about what's coming next in terms of those events. So we're very fortunate to work with Amber and the clothing range that she produces. As I say, with the profits going towards Homeless Oxfordshire.
So if anyone's interested in what we're modelling, Amber Lights website.
Amber Lights Oxford. Search that up. You'll be able to come across the website there.
Yeah, a true trailblazer. Well, thank you, Simon. That's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been great to have you on. And some great insights. Hopefully the listeners have taken a lot from that. I think we'll struggle to get a couple of snippets from that for the old socials. So thank you. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe. We post this on our YouTube page. We're also on Spotify and Apple, and it's on our website as well. So thanks again, Simon. And that's been Topline Talks.